Welcome to Climate Channel, Climate Conversation with Quamrul Chowdhury, Climate Action Pathways, episode 55. So in our 55th episode today, we are going to discuss the Global Climate Summit, COP26 outcome, Glasgow climate fact, and also the road ahead to Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 in Egypt come November 2022. What we have had at Glasgow climate fact, whether it was sufficient to see the emergency as alarmed by IPCC AR6 Assessment Report 1 working group. Whether it was quite satisfactory for the people of this planet, or the mankind was dashed again the hopes and aspiration to cut back deeply their emissions of greenhouse gases and phasing out or phasing down the fossil fuels, coal. How do we fare? What is our rating of COP26 just ended last month, November 13th, after an extension of almost 36 hours. So today we had a very distinguished panel, Cathy Orlando, Joshep Richardson, and Cathy Ytong. With this panel, we are going to discuss with the outcome of COP26. I would first ask Cathy Orlando, what is your take? Are you rating it at what level? Is it a successful COP? Is it a half glass full, half glass empty outcome? Whether it was sufficient enough to keep us at 1.5 degree temperature regime rise level as enshrined in Paris Agreement of 2015, or to stabilize the greenhouse gases as enshrined in our very dear convention crafted in 1992, United Nations Framework Convention, as we call it. Whether finance, what about $100 billion global goal for every year to mobilize as climate finance, Green Climate Fund, how it is delivered. And what about adaptation goal? What about definition of climate finance? What about loss and damage induced by climatic changes? Cathy Orlando.
Thank you for that excellent and layered question. Starting with the cup half full, half empty. That's what I thought the Paris Agreement was in 2015. And I think we're just slightly better than that in 2021, just slightly. And we're heading down the right track. And the reason why I say that is I do like to make the metaphor that COP26 was much like Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, and that it was the best of times and the worst of times. And I'll start with the worst of times, from an emotional perspective, from the loss and damage perspective, from the perspective of looking at equity and the global south and many factors that are dear to my heart. I felt that there was a lot of things that were very difficult to deal with. So, for example, on the last day in the People's Plenary that was running parallel to the plenary for the parties, we listened to the various constituencies like the Yango and Ringo and the Indigenous and the disabled, and there was a lot of disappointment in the room. And then in the evening, when we listened, and the next day when we were listening to the leaders give their countries give their final statements, you could see there was two sentiments happening. So it was a lot to deal with emotionally, especially still not seeing enough on loss and damage and adaptation. And I'm not like super knowledgeable about all those details, but I know there was a sense of disappointment there, and I totally felt that. But then I have to pull back and not use my emotional side of myself, which is important. I honor that, but also get a little bit rational and balance with that, and note that what is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change? It is a consensus-seeking body of 196 countries that cannot force their will upon other countries. So the best they can do is get voluntary agreements. And what I did see was a lot of good voluntary agreements and a track being laid down. And yesterday I heard from one of my colleagues that if every single commitment, including all the net zero commitments, are made according to On-Roads, as well as other top level agencies on the planet, we are on track for a 1.8C planet. Now I'm going to pull back to my emotional side, but we're still only have commitments to get us to about 2.7 degrees. So we have a lot of work ahead of us, and there's equity and justice issues embedded into all of this that are deeply concerning for me. So lastly, I just want to say that I think where it's really going to be important in 2022 that we get the conversation elevated as much as possible for making sure people understand why adaptation funding is so important, why loss and damage funding is so important, and what are the best policies to cut emissions so we can get there in a socially just and fast way. So thank you for that opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Cathy Orlando, for sharing your initial take on the outcome of just ended COP26. You are right in a great sense. So can I ask Joshep Richardson, what is your uptake here? How do you see it? And meanwhile, Mariam Ragai, can you also open your video? And Mark Lotus. Joseph, Joe.
Yes. Yeah. So, I'll be brief in my initial overview. I agree with Cathy that we're on the right track. And the COP26, did feature a number of important breakthroughs in terms of the overall sense of urgency. An unprecedented amount of money from financial institutions committed in a general way to realign with climate stability in the future, potentially up to $130 trillion. That's a good thing if it is real. I think that the Glasgow Pact recognizes that the danger threshold for meeting the mandate of the convention, avoiding danger, is 1.5 degrees. I think that's important, that's a more solid recognition than we had before. The fact that when we talk about net zero, it has to be science-based, it has to be 1.5 compliant, I think that's important. We're happy that there was a new work program for action for climate empowerment so that climate civics can play a role across the world. But I think it's clear that the failure to agree to a funding facility for loss and damage is problematic. And it's not only a justice issue. It's not only about vulnerable countries being compensated for damage that has been imposed on them. It's also about the fact that we're not going to be able to solve climate change if not all countries have the basic minimum capability to function fully as nations. Climate damage is far more than something that needs to be paid for. It undermines the stability and the everyday resilience of nations and of cultures and of regions. And so until we have a real way to make sure that where significant climate damage happens, countries can be made whole, countries can be brought back to baseline quickly so that we can all move forward together, I think that's going to be a hindrance to our overall global effort to build a resilient economy. So the final word I'd say about all this is, you know, as an organization, Citizens Climate International, that works with citizen volunteers on 6 continents, you know, we warned early on that if stakeholders and observers were not present in the negotiating rooms, we could have a problem where ambition could be lowered by bad actors manipulating the consensus process to get a little bit of a diminished outcome. And we think that that is what played out. And so we're very eager to see a much more robust participation of observers in the COP27 and in the SB56 in June.
Yes, you are right, absolutely, Joe, that the participation of the civil society bodies and representatives of the youths, indigenous community, farmers, and other constituents were not enough, and most of the time they are not represented at all at many meetings I have witnessed. But G77 and China many a times encourage that, but some parties, they are not willing to entertain the civil society bodies or say observer organizations, institutions like say you represent Joe, Citizens Climate International or other bodies like say Cathy Orlando, she represented Yango over there, but many a times she couldn't be there. So that way it was not full participation, effective participation of not only all the parties and all the observer organizations, institutions, research organizations, academics. So that way, hopefully, COP27 at Sharm el-Sheikh would be more participatory one. But given the COVID situation and also a lot of challenges, logistical challenges, lot of accommodation issues, lot of visa issues, lot of COVID vaccine issues, so many issues are before COP26 in Glasgow, and they had to host UK government had to face those. But all said and done, it was held with participation of almost 40,000 people, but mostly from the developed north, not much from developing south, not much from Latin America, not much from Africa, not much from Asia, or say Caribbean, or say Pacific Island states, low-lying states, least developed countries. So that way it was glossed over to some extent. But all said and done, it was held, it was done, and it was also dusted. Now, I would now like to request Cathy Orlando. What is your reflection?
Thanks, Quamrul. And yeah, I guess probably also similar to what I might have mentioned in the previous sessions. And then I guess just to echo what Joe said, hopefully that no negotiation in next SBs will be closed. And this year, transparency was indeed very sad. So hopefully next year it won't be the same. And also my main focus at this COP was fully on technology in terms of negotiations. And it went very well for me, at least, that Yango WGC for the first time have a real seat at a constituted body. And I'm very glad to have worked on it together with great colleagues like Hindu and my colleagues from Yango and WGC to really make this happen, and especially with the support from many parties. But also, of course, there are challenges where one party thinks that 15% of women participation is already enough. So it's indeed difficult to agree with them on things like this. And also on technology, really want to see a stronger linkage between technology mechanism and financial mechanism. And speaking of finance, there's always the disappointment on the $100 billion, on adaptation, on loss and damage, and on adaptation funds specifically. I think it's looking from the bright side is great that for the first time they have an indicator on youth. So definitely looking forward for more to come, and hopefully GCF and Jeff will follow. And in terms of youth engagement, I think the UK presidency really did a great job. They really tried, but at the same time, sometimes we still find it tokenistic at times. And also further to what Cathy said, in general, even a 1.5 degrees world still means that many people will be suffering and many people will be losing their lives. And so we do hope to see stronger ambition and then also inclusivity in terms of civil society stakeholder engagement. But yeah, also looking from the bright side, is great that this COP has so much attention from the public and also from private sector, and also their attention, and especially that by profession I actually work in the private sector. So I think it's really great to see that all eyes were on COP. But hopefully that more companies will also have more, let's say, in detailed and well-planned targets instead of just calling that we're aligning our investment with the goals.
Thank you, Cathy Lee. Cathy Orlando, what is your take, especially at COP26, in terms of equity, justice, displacement, but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities, human rights, justice issues? How do you look at that from that lens?
Thank you. As a mother of 3 daughters, as a woman, I would like to echo Cathy that 15% is not enough representation on anything. And I was in a session on women and climate, a couple of them, and I'll focus on that for a while. I think there needs to be a lot more gender mainstreaming in NDCs. That is practically missing in almost every country. We need a lot more women representation in negotiations and on various teams. And just so from a woman's perspective, certainly I'd like to see more women's perspectives, because we have a special lens on this, and we are the most impacted, and especially women of the global south and women of color and indigenous women. We need to see a lot more of them represented so we can hear their voices. Additionally, just staying onto gender, I was in this session on women and gender, that I think men need to be a lot more like women. Okay, and that our behaviors, according to at least one Swedish study, tend to be of a lower carbon consumption. So, so men should just take a good look at what we're doing and know that we are just by nature are a little bit less carbon consumptive. So taking that perspective. I'm going to back up a little and switch gears. Before I went to COP, I live in a community that is 30% Indigenous, people of Indigenous descent. I live in a mining community in Northern Ontario. And one of the elders here led us on my community, including political representatives and my daughter, who was a youth delegate at COP, on a teaching with what's called a dream catcher, and it basically connects everything. And we all got to meditate on while he was doing this, and one of the teachings I got out of it.
He's the Chargé d'Affaires of Emirates. I'm the deputy head of mission of the Egyptian embassy.
Miriam, if you could mute that would be great. Okay. Anyways, one of the teachings I got out of that hour-long session was that anything that is unbalanced is doomed for failure. And I think that the system is unbalanced, and overall we need to create more we need to create more balance. So anything that is unbalanced is doomed for failure. Anything that is unbalanced is unjust. And I still think the COP system is unbalanced, and we have to balance that off with more Indigenous voices, more youth voices, and more women representation on all of the bodies and all of the advising. Thank you.
Thank you. What happened to Joe? Can you come on, say, human rights issues, equity issues, social justice issues, displacement issues? What I asked Cathy Orlando, she shocked away that, and she raised, of course, gender issue, women issue, and also indigenous issue. So can you go ahead with your take on human rights, equity, justice, displacement, security issues at COP26, say, or in climate change convention process? Joe.
Sure. You know, I think historically we've treated human rights as something that nations aspire to be able to honor and protect, because historically there's been so much injustice and inequity in the way societies have been governed. And I think what we're beginning to recognize in the 21st century is there shouldn't be any place anywhere on earth where the baseline is not the everyday protection and honoring and centering of human rights. The foundation of the social contract is that institutions exist to serve humanity, that we have a role in making each other safer and empowering each other to fully realize our potential. There really is no legitimate argument that any institution can make that there's some important practical reason to do away with that standard. The underlying ethical standard for any society is that. And so that's the first thing. I think we're now facing a global problem where the climate system has done something interesting to our ethical fabric. It has revealed our metaphysical, ethical connection to each other in geophysical terms. Something that takes place in one community in one part of the world can affect people on the other side of the planet physically. And so that ethical interconnection we have is now manifest. There was an effort among some countries to try to remove language about human rights from certain elements of the Glasgow outcomes. And it ended up that on the first page of the Glasgow Pact, the language about human rights, which is very similar to the Paris Agreement language, is there. And so clearly, all nations have this obligation to honor human rights. The right to health is recognized. The rights of stakeholder groups are recognized. The problem that I think we have in practical terms is if a country isn't willing to honor human rights as a core principle of how it operates, then there's really no way for us to know that it will honor any obligation, because that is the most foundational obligation there is. And if a government is willing to interfere with the human rights of its people, then it is likely willing to impose unjust harm on other people. So there's no way we're going to solve climate change unless we correct this misconception that some governments have, that violating human rights is convenient for them and their purposes. I don't think we made enough progress in Glasgow on this point, but the language that is on page 1 of the Glasgow Pact is important, and I view it as legally binding on all nations. The question is going to be, what does it turn into in terms of the practical outcomes on climate action? Will we view stakeholders as leaders? Will we allow stakeholder voices to guide the hand of government, to guide the hand of high-level financial decision makers, and to make sure that if not today or tomorrow, then very soon, in the next few years, it is considered unacceptable to invest in climate damage? I think that we are on that track, but we're not going fast enough in that direction. And I think that over the next year or two, as we go to the COP27, the COP28, communities all over the world, in rich countries, in less affluent developing countries, in the most vulnerable countries, we have a shared responsibility to make sure that the places where decision makers are overconfident about their ability to govern the geophysics of their situation, that they start to recognize that until they take seriously the rights of vulnerable people, they themselves, their institution of government, their economies, their fiscal health and resilience decades into the future, their food systems will not be safe. Until we recognize that human rights, our overall stability as a world community, and the resilience of the biosphere are all connected, then we are not yet safe. We are not yet where we need to be to solve this.
Thank you, Joe. Cathy Ytong, how do you react as Cathy Orlando and Joe Robertson?
Yeah, and I think really interesting point on human rights is really glad that many parties have raised the importance of it, especially in Article 6 at the SB's closing in week 1, and it was really great. And we were all clapping at the back when Mexico first started it. And also, as folks have mentioned, I really hope the 2 incoming presidencies will make sure that human rights and civil society stakeholders will be respected. So that is something that that would be great to see. And on IP, I think it's great that LSIP negotiations went well. At least that's what Hindu said. So I didn't manage to follow it, but it's always great to see that they have a specific negotiation track specifically focused on IP and on gender. Again, that really echo what Cathy said about gender in NDCs. And the gender team at the Secretariat actually hosted a workshop before COP, and I was facilitating the topic on COP26 agenda items. And the attendees were including some national gender focal points, and many of them have highlighted the lack of monitoring of gender in NDCs, and also the role of national gender focal points are really unclear and not connected, just like the ACE national focal points. So which is very sad, and the Secretariat is trying the best they can, and they have so little capacity. So really hope that parties can have more attention on that and make sure that the gender is highlighted in NDCs and being monitored in terms of implementation, and also that the gender national focal points will have a clearer role and more responsibility as well.
Thank you, Cathy Lee. Cathy Orlando, you have a perspective of a global north, but you have also root in global south, like South Asia, Bangladesh, India, and also Pakistan in the subcontinent from your forefathers or from your mother's side. So how do you see the connection, the geophysical, as Joe also alluding us, and also from the point of view of equity, justice, displacement issues?
That's a very deep question. And just for everybody else's benefit, what Quamrul is referring to is that my great-great-grandfather was chief meteorologist for all of India and developed the system at that time. If India included Bangladesh and Pakistan, they were all one. Anyways, and created a system of telegraph stations that would allow for the understanding of the meteorology that led to the monsoons, so that communities in the Bay of Bengal could prepare for flooding, so and monsoons. So additionally, I grew up with a book about India in our living room, and just fell in love with India, and ultimately married somebody his family was born in India, and his mother was born in Lahore and his dad was born in Rajasthan. And my mother-in-law being born in Lahore, for those of you who are not getting the math here, she was born in the 40s, in the 1940s in Lahore, and at age 5 suffered through partition when India and Pakistan separated, and she saw things no 5-year-old should see. So my mother-in-law was a refugee and saw horrendous things, and that pain is in my household. We honor it, we understand it, and so I feel that pain from the subcontinent of what happened every day. Not every day, but through, anyways, it's in my house because I'm married to somebody I've been with for 35 years. When the floods in Pakistan happened in 2010, one of my friends from Climate Reality kept posting images of children who were, the 1.5 million children, or I can't remember how many, that were homeless, and they looked like my daughters. So, my heart, every day I'd open my Facebook page and I would see my children, and I know in the future, much of humanity is going to marry, and I think marry each other, right? So right now I'm living the future through, and the past in my family and in my household. So, and lastly, my father-in-law was an IPCC scientist for the first report in 1990. So when I first met my husband, he said climate change was going to be a severe problem as we were entering our middle ages, in the early, in the 2010s. And always been alarmed about climate change. And he's from Rajasthan, and it's a desert part of the world. And it's probably one of the places that are at grave risk for heat domes. So it's just, and we just had a heat dome here in Canada that settled in over Lytton and burnt the community to the ground ultimately because of all the desiccation. And so I feel this super interconnectedness and almost warning from my ancestors to protect my grandchildren. Thank you.
Thank you. You also raised, in a sense, an intergeneration issue, which was also glossed over, even at COP26 in Glasgow. So that is part of the glass half empty. Joe, what is your closing comment?
My closing comment, I'll say 3 specific things that come to mind. And one is to build on what Cathy and you have just mentioned, intergenerational equity. It's obvious that the climate emergency is an intergenerational ethical challenge. We have to avoid imposing on future generations an unlivable you know, planet where conditions are not right for feeding the billions of people that will inhabit this world. But I want to highlight, in regards to intergenerational equity, the preamble to the United States Constitution says that the Republic was established in part to secure to ourselves and our posterity the blessings of liberty. You cannot be free if you cannot eat. You cannot be free if you cannot have a home, if you have to be on the run, a refugee with no place, no safe place. So there's a core of American law calls for solving this problem. And there should be no part of American society that doesn't recognize that. Because our what we like to refer to as our way of life is simply not feasible in a world of persistent climate emergency. The second thing I wanted to highlight is it's really important that the Glasgow negotiations resulted in rules for not just Article 6 of the Paris Agreement on cooperative decarbonization, so that nations can more effectively work together to do more and to solve this problem more quickly. But it's really important that those rules include non-market approaches. So not only emissions trading, but the possibility that nations can use financial regulations, trade conditionalities, conditional development assistance, even fiscal rescue packages where they try to help a nation avoid defaulting on its international debts, to condition climate action, to make this great, you know, solutions enterprise go faster so that we can have a livable world. This is really important, and the degree to which that opportunity is seized, the degree to which creativity is brought to bear, and transparency is enforced so that we know these things are real, that is going to help determine whether we solve this problem or not. And the final thing I wanted to mention is food systems. We've now begun to recognize inside of the climate negotiating process that if we want to have a world where everyone can actually eat and be nourished and have a chance at a healthy and productive life, we have to have food systems that are climate smart, nature positive, and where watersheds are not only stable and secure and clean, but also anchored by an enduring cryosphere and mountain glaciers and the climate regulating natural services that we cannot recreate on our own. This is all beginning to be recognized in a much more universal way. And efforts like the Regen 10 initiative to bring regenerative farming to 500 million farmers in the next 9 years, some of these things that came forward at the COP26, we have to work on operationalizing them and making them part of our everyday existence over the next couple of years. And I think if we do those things, we can get on track to climate safety.
Thank you very much, Joe, for your also closing comments. Hopefully, those will be enshrined in our way towards Sharm el-Sheikh COP27 and also COP28 in Dubai, and then in Eastern Europe COP29, so that in this down the lane 3 conference of parties, the COPs upcoming, where we can discuss those, and that discourse is very important, and that discourse should be more effective and participatory way, so that global south, global north can engage, and also the people on the grassroots level, the people at indigenous community, the women, the youth, the academics, the educationists, the farmers, everybody can join, and their hopes and aspiration can help build equity, intergenerational equity ensured in our climatic system, in our development efforts, in protecting the human rights and justice issues, to protect the planet, Mother Earth, going down to the nature and living with the nature, not disturbing the nature, not demolishing the planet, not demolishing our ecosystem all over the world, across the globe, across the continents, Latin America, Asia, Africa, Caribbean, Pacific. With that, I would like to thank you all. It was a great pleasure to have your voices heard today at Climate Channel. Throw it to the humanity. Throw it to the planet Earth, Mother Earth, everywhere, every continent. Thank you. On behalf of Climate Channel, Climate Conversation with Quamrul Chowdhury, episode 55th ends here today, tonight, this morning. Thank you very much for joining me.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Cathy Lim and Cathy Orlando, Joe. Thank you very much.
Yeah.